There's something happening inside certain people around you right now, and you cannot see it. No warning, no breakdown, no dramatic exit. Just a quiet, irreversible shift occurring deep inside the brain of someone who has been hurt one too many times. From the outside, nothing looks different. They still smile. They still listen. They still show up, but internally, chemically, biologically, permanently, something has already completed its transformation. Something that cannot be undone. Something most people won't recognize until the person they thought they knew is already gone. Here's what nobody tells you about empaths. They are not the most vulnerable people in the room. They are the most dangerous once pain finds them enough times. Because the human brain was never designed to absorb repeated emotional injury without adapting. And when it does adapt, it doesn't just heal. It rewires. Silently. Precisely. Completely. And what emerges on the other side is not someone broken. It's someone whose empathy, once freely given, once easily exploited, has now become the most controlled, most lethal force in any room they enter. This is not a story about damage. This is a story about what happens when biology refuses to let someone stay weak. There's a specific moment, and most people never catch it, where an empath stops reacting and starts recording. Not consciously, not deliberately. It happens the way all real transformation happens, quietly, beneath the surface, while everything on the outside still looks exactly the same. In the beginning, the empath operates purely from feeling. This is not a choice. This is biology. Their brains mirror neuron systems fire with such intensity that they don't simply observe your emotions from a distance, they absorb them. They simulate them internally. When you are in pain, something inside them genuinely hurts. When you are confused, something inside them genuinely searches for your answer. This is not a personality trait. This is a neurological reality. And for a long time, it makes them the most understanding person in any room they enter. But here is where the story changes. Every single time that empathy is extended and met with betrayal, dismissal, or emotional carelessness, the brain does something the empath isn't even aware of. It logs it, not as a mistake, not as a misunderstanding, as a pattern. And the brain does not treat patterns the way we treat feelings. Feelings can be talked through. Feelings can be explained away. Patterns cannot, because patterns are not emotional conclusions, they are data. And data accumulates silently. The first time, the empath forgives almost instantly. Their emotional system is still dominant, still generous, still willing to believe the best. The second time, there's a slight pause, barely noticeable even to them. A small hesitation before opening up again. A quiet internal question that wasn't there before. The third time, something shifts underneath the surface that no conversation will ever fully reverse. Because the brain has now seen enough repetition to stop classifying the behavior as accidental and start classifying it as predictable. This is the exact moment emotion begins losing its authority. Because the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logic, risk assessment, and long-term decision-making, starts stepping in. Starts overriding, starts replacing emotional impulse with something far more precise. Observation. The empath who once felt their way through every interaction begins watching their way through it instead. And watching changes everything. Because when you stop reacting and start observing, you notice things that feelings were too loud to let you hear before. The slight inconsistency in someone's words. The way their behavior shifts when they think there are no consequences. The pattern of how respect appears when they need something and disappears when they don't. The empath sees all of it now. And here is what makes this transformation so profound, so permanent, and so completely misunderstood by everyone around them. People assume the empath is becoming cold. People assume distance means damage. People look at the silence and call it bitterness. But that is not what is happening. What is happening is far more sophisticated than emotion and far more powerful than anger. The empath is not shutting down feeling. They are filtering it, directing it, controlling it in a way they never had to before, because before it was never weaponized against them the way it was. And once that filter is installed, once the brain has made the full transition from emotional reaction to pattern recognition, the dynamic in every relationship around them changes completely. Because you cannot manipulate someone who has stopped responding to manipulation with feeling and started responding to it with data. Emotion can be confused. Emotion can be redirected. Emotion can be exploited by the right words at the right moment. But patterns don't negotiate. Patterns don't forgive inconsistency. Patterns don't soften for a good excuse. And an empath running on pattern recognition, calm, quiet, and completely aware, is no longer the person anyone thought they were dealing with. Most people think emotional pain is just a feeling, something abstract, something that lives only in the mind and disappears when the moment passes, something that can be fixed with the right words, the right apology, the right amount of time. But science tells a completely different story. And once you understand what is actually happening inside the brain and body of an empath who has been repeatedly hurt, not emotionally, not philosophically, but neurologically, you will never look at their transformation the same way again. Here is the first thing you need to understand. Emotional pain and physical pain are not two separate experiences inside the human brain. They are processed through the same neural pathways. The same regions that activate when you break a bone, when you burn your hand, when your body registers physical damage. Those exact same regions light up when a person experiences social rejection, emotional betrayal, or repeated relational disappointment. This is not a metaphor. This has been confirmed through brain imaging studies that show social and emotional distress producing neurological responses identical to physical injury. So when someone tells an empath to just get over it, they are essentially telling someone with a broken leg to stop limping. The pain is real. The damage is measurable. And with repetition, it compounds. Now here is where it gets even more significant. The brain contains a structure called the amygdala, a small almond-shaped region that functions as the brain's threat detection system. Its entire purpose is survival. It monitors the environment constantly, scanning for danger, logging threats, building a library of experiences that signal risk. And here is the critical part: the amygdala does not distinguish between physical threats and emotional ones. A raised fist and a repeated betrayal register in the same system. Both are logged as danger. Both trigger the same survival response. So when an empath is hurt once, the amygdala notes it. When they are hurt again, it elevates the alert. And when the pattern repeats enough times, the amygdala stops waiting for the pain to arrive and starts predicting it before it even happens. This is called anticipatory stress, and it rewires the entire way a person experiences relationships. Suddenly, a delayed message carries weight it never used to carry. A shift in someone's tone feels like the beginning of something familiar and painful. A small inconsistency triggers an internal alarm that the conscious mind can barely explain. This is not the empath being dramatic. This is their brain doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect them from a threat it has now fully recognized. And the body follows, because the brain and body are not separate systems operating independently. They are in constant communication. When the amygdala triggers a stress response, the body releases cortisol, the primary stress hormone. In small doses, cortisol is useful. It sharpens focus. It prepares the body for action. But when emotional pain is chronic, when the stress response is activated repeatedly over time, cortisol levels remain elevated far beyond what the body was designed to sustain. And the consequences are not just emotional. Elevated cortisol disrupts sleep. It weakens immune function. It affects cardiovascular health. It creates a state of biological exhaustion that no amount of rest fully repairs. This is why empaths who are repeatedly hurt describe a tiredness that goes beyond normal, a heaviness that sleep doesn't fix, an exhaustion that has no clear physical cause but is absolutely physically real. Because their nervous system has been running in survival mode, not for days but for months, sometimes years, quietly burning through resources that were never meant to be used at that rate. And then something remarkable happens. The brain, because it is extraordinary in its design, begins to adapt, not to collapse under the weight of repeated emotional injury, but to reorganize around it. This is neuroplasticity. The brain's ability to restructure itself based on repeated experience, to build new pathways, to redirect responses, to evolve its own operating system in real time based on what the environment is consistently delivering. And for the empath, this reorganization is not subtle. It is complete. The nervous system that was once open, responsive, and almost defenseless in its generosity begins shifting into something far more calculated. The emotional impulses that once fired instantly and freely start being intercepted by higher cognitive functions. Logic begins integrating with feeling in a way it never had to before. Risk assessment becomes automatic. Pattern recognition becomes instinctive. What was once pure emotional sensitivity becomes something the brain has now reinforced with biological armor. And that armor was not chosen. It was not built consciously or deliberately. It was constructed by the brain itself, one painful experience at a time, because the human nervous system will always choose adaptation over destruction. Most people misread silence. They see it as absence. They interpret it as weakness. They look at someone who has stopped explaining, stopped arguing, stopped reaching out, and they assume something has been lost, that the person has given up, that the quiet means defeat, that the stillness is somehow a sign that the other side has won. But there is a specific kind of silence that carries none of those things. A silence that is not empty but completely full. Not the silence of someone who has nothing left to say, but the silence of someone who has finally stopped saying things to people who were never truly listening. And when an empath goes quiet, this is almost always what it is. In the early stages of being hurt, the empath does what their nature demands. They communicate. They explain their feelings with a level of detail and care that most people are not even capable of. They try to build bridges across misunderstandings that probably should have never required a bridge in the first place. They give words when words are not deserved. They offer clarity to people who are comfortable living in confusion because confusion keeps the dynamic in their favor. And every single time they do this, every time they reach out, explain, and try again, they are unknowingly doing something that works against them. They are providing reinforcement. In behavioral psychology, reinforcement is what keeps a pattern alive. It is what tells the brain on the other side of the relationship that the behavior is working, that the inconsistency, the dismissal, the emotional carelessness, all of it is acceptable because the empath is still there, still engaged, still emotionally present enough to fight for something that the other person has already stopped protecting. But then something shifts, not in a single moment, not in one dramatic conversation, but gradually, quietly, in the accumulation of too many moments where effort was extended and nothing real came back. The empath stops explaining. Not because they have run out of words, they haven't. Not because they no longer care, they do. But because something inside them, at a level deeper than conscious thought, has recognized a truth that the heart was too generous to accept earlier. Some people do not want understanding. They want access. And the moment that distinction becomes clear inside the empath's mind, silence becomes the most powerful tool they possess. Because silence removes the reinforcement entirely. It cuts off the emotional energy that was keeping the dynamic alive. It stops feeding a pattern that was only surviving because the empath kept showing up to sustain it. And when that supply disappears, when the explanations stop, when the emotional reactions stop, when the availability stops, the entire structure of the unhealthy dynamic begins to destabilize. This is not manipulation. This is not a strategy designed in a moment of anger. This is the nervous system's natural response to a threat it has finally fully identified. The brain withdraws investment from environments that consistently produce loss. It is not a decision, and it is a biological correction. And the silence that follows is the outward expression of an inward process that has already reached its conclusion. What most people never understand is what that silence actually costs the empath, because they are still feeling everything, every bit of it. The silence is not the absence of emotion. It is emotion being held, contained, and redirected by a nervous system that has learned through pain that releasing it freely into the wrong environment only creates more damage. So they hold it. They carry it internally while appearing completely still on the outside. And that stillness, that ability to feel deeply while revealing nothing, is one of the most difficult things a human being can train themselves to do. It is not coldness. It is extraordinary discipline born from extraordinary pain. And here is what makes this silence so fundamentally different from ordinary quiet. It is not waiting for a response. It is not hoping to be noticed. It is not a test designed to see if the other person will reach out. Those are the silences of someone still emotionally invested in the outcome. The silence of a fully aware empath carries none of that energy. There is no waiting inside it, no hoping, no door left slightly open just in case. Because internally, the process is already complete. The brain has run the pattern enough times to reach certainty. And certainty does not leave gaps. It does not linger at the edge of a decision wondering if things might be different. It does not soften when familiar words arrive or old memories surface. Certainty simply holds its position, quietly, immovably, without needing to announce itself to anyone. And that is what makes the empath's silence so unsettling to the people who caused it, because it doesn't ask for anything. It doesn't demand acknowledgement. It doesn't perform. It simply exists, complete, final, and entirely self-contained. A silence so grounded and so resolved that it communicates more than any conversation ever could. Not anger, not bitterness, not even disappointment anymore. Just clarity. And a person who has found their clarity has already moved beyond the need for your understanding of it. There is a version of empathy that most people never get to witness. Not because it is rare in the people who carry it, but because it only emerges after something significant has happened to them. After enough pain has moved through them. After enough generosity has been met with carelessness. After the person who once gave their emotional energy freely, openly, almost recklessly, has finally learned what that openness actually cost them. And what emerges on the other side of that education is not what most people expect. It is not bitterness. It is not emotional shutdown. It is not someone who has lost their ability to feel deeply or connect genuinely. In fact, it is almost the opposite. What emerges is something far more sophisticated, far more controlled, and far more powerful than the unlimited empathy that existed before it. It is selective empathy. And in the right hands, it becomes the most precise emotional force a human being can possess. Here is what most people fundamentally misunderstand about this transformation. They see the empath pulling back and they interpret it as damage. They see the reduced availability, the careful boundaries, the measured responses, and they call it coldness. They tell the empath they have changed, as if change in this direction is something to be ashamed of. As if the person who absorbs everything from everyone indefinitely is somehow healthier than the person who has learned to direct their energy with intention. But that interpretation reveals far more about the observer than it does about the empath. Because selective empathy is not the absence of feeling. It is feeling with a filter installed, a filter built not from indifference but from experience, from pattern recognition, from the accumulated understanding that emotional energy is not infinite and that pouring it without direction, without evaluation, without any regard for where it lands is not generosity. It is self-destruction wearing the mask of kindness. Think about what unlimited empathy actually looks like in practice. It means absorbing the emotional weight of people who never ask themselves whether they deserve to be carried. It means forgiving behaviors that were never genuinely examined by the person who produced them. It means staying in rooms that were slowly draining the life from you because leaving felt like abandonment and abandonment felt unacceptable. Unlimited empathy in the wrong environment is not a gift. It is an open wound that certain people learn to feed from without ever intending to close. And the brain eventually, inevitably, recognizes this. When the prefrontal cortex begins integrating with the emotional centers of the brain, something remarkable starts happening. The empath begins evaluating before they invest. Not coldly, not cynically, but carefully, deliberately, with a level of discernment that was always available to them but was previously overridden by emotional impulse. They start asking questions internally that never surfaced before. Not, how can I help this person, but has this person demonstrated that they are safe with what I give them? Not, how do I fix this dynamic, but does this dynamic deserve the energy required to fix it? And those questions, quiet, internal, never announced, begin redirecting everything. The empathy doesn't shrink. It sharpens. It moves away from people who treated it like a resource to be extracted and toward people who treat it like something rare and worth protecting. And the difference in how it lands in those two environments is extraordinary. Because empathy that is focused, that is chosen rather than defaulted to, carries a completely different quality than empathy that is simply available to whoever reaches for it. The right people begin experiencing something deeper from the empath than they ever did before. More genuine, more present, more intentional. Because the empath is no longer divided across 10 different relationships that are pulling in 10 different directions. Their emotional energy has been consolidated, concentrated. And concentrated energy in any form is exponentially more powerful than the same energy spread thin. Meanwhile, the wrong people begin noticing something they cannot quite name. A distance that wasn't there before, a warmth that has been quietly withdrawn, an availability that has disappeared without explanation. And they will often interpret this as punishment, as the empath being difficult, as something that needs to be fixed or argued against or waited out. But it is none of those things. It is simply the natural result of a system that has learned to allocate its resources based on evidence rather than hope, based on demonstrated patterns rather than stated intentions, based on what people consistently do rather than what they occasionally say. And once that system is operating, once selective empathy has fully replaced unlimited empathy as the empath's default mode, the dynamic in every relationship around them shifts in ways that cannot be negotiated back. Because you cannot convince someone to lower a standard they built from their own pain. You cannot argue someone out of a boundary their nervous system constructed for survival. You cannot charm your way back into unlimited access with someone whose brain has already learned exactly what unlimited access cost them. Selective empathy is not a wall. It is a gate, and the empath now holds the key. There is something that happens inside a person after they have been through enough. Not a decision, not a choice made consciously in a single clear moment. Something deeper than that. Something that occurs at a level most people never think about, beneath the feelings, beneath the thoughts, beneath even the awareness of the person it is happening to. A shift so fundamental, so complete, that when it finishes, there is genuinely no pathway back to what existed before it. And this is the part of the empath's transformation that most people never fully grasp. They assume it is temporary. They assume that with the right words, the right timing, the right amount of effort, the empath can be brought back to where they were. Back to the openness, back to the availability, back to the version of themselves that forgave quickly, trusted easily, and stayed long past the point where staying made any rational sense. They believe this because they have seen the empath return before. They have witnessed the forgiveness, the second chances, the willingness to try again. And they have filed that pattern away as permanent evidence that the empath will always come back. But what they failed to notice was where the empath was in their process during those returns. Every time the empath came back before, they were still in the early stages of understanding. Still running on hope rather than data. Still allowing emotional attachment to override what the patterns were clearly communicating. Still giving the benefit of the doubt to someone who had already spent every last bit of that benefit and never once attempted to replenish it. Those returns were not signs of infinite resilience. They were signs of an incomplete education. And education, once completed, does not reverse itself. This is where neuroscience becomes undeniable. The brain learns through repetition. Every experience carves a pathway. Every repeated experience deepens that pathway until it becomes not just a route the brain can take, but the route the brain automatically takes. This is neuroplasticity working in its most permanent form. And when an empath has experienced enough cycles of the same painful pattern, enough repetitions of the same betrayal, the same dismissal, the same dynamic playing out with the same inevitable ending, those pathways do not just form. They solidify. And solidified neural pathways do not dissolve because someone finally decided to change. They do not soften because the right apology arrived. They do not open back up because the person who caused the damage has now realized what they had. The brain does not work that way. It does not unlearn what it has fully and completely learned. It does not return to vulnerability. It has already paid the price to move beyond. What most people are waiting for, that moment when the empath finally forgives completely and returns to exactly who they were, is a moment that is never coming. Not because the empath is punishing anyone. Not because they are holding on to anger or nursing resentment in some quiet corner of themselves, but because the person those people are waiting to return simply no longer exists in that form. The evolution consumed them. And what stands in their place is someone who carries all the same depth, all the same capacity for genuine connection, all the same ability to feel things at a level most people never reach, but with something additional now built into the foundation of who they are. An awareness that cannot be switched off. A recognition that fires automatically. An internal system that identifies patterns before they fully form and responds to them with clarity instead of hope. This is not armor in the way most people imagine armor. It is not a hardness, not a coldness, not a deliberate emotional distance maintained through constant effort. It is something far more integrated than that. It has become part of how the empath processes the world at the most fundamental level. The way they read a room, the way they listen to words while simultaneously tracking whether those words align with behavior. The way they feel warmth towards someone while a separate, quieter part of their awareness is already cataloging consistency, already measuring effort, already noting whether respect remains constant or fluctuates based on convenience. They cannot turn this off. It is not a mode they enter and exit. It is who they have become. And here is what makes this evolution genuinely irreversible in the most important sense. It was not chosen from a place of fear. It was not constructed from bitterness or assembled from the broken pieces of someone who gave up on people entirely. It was built from understanding, from the kind of understanding that only comes through direct, repeated, undeniable experience. The kind that bypasses opinion and lands directly in certainty. And certainty, once arrived at through that kind of experience, does not entertain doubt the way it once did. The empath still loves deeply, still connects genuinely, still brings a quality of presence and understanding to their relationships that is genuinely rare. But they bring it now with their eyes fully open, with their awareness fully activated, with a part of themselves always present that was not present before, watching, recognizing, measuring not out of paranoia, but out of hard-earned wisdom that the nervous system refuses to abandon. Because the nervous system remembers everything it paid for.